That's what I have.
We're
Right? Or is
live.
it
Hello. Hello,
hello?
everyone.
Hello, hello.
Welcome to the 6 to 7 Figure Women podcast with me, Jessica Fernley, and my wonderful co-host, Megan Conter.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you.
Today we have a very special guest. We have Heather Roberts, who is a long-time entrepreneur. I want to say serial entrepreneur because you've done quite a few fun things, haven't you, Heather?
I have.
What would you add to my introduction?
I think I loved it. Serial entrepreneur that I started kind of by accident.
Can you tell us your business
Little bit
chapters that you've had?
Yep, little
That'd be
background,
awesome.
sure. So prior to 2007, I was a stay-at-home mom. So I was responsible for all things home. Kind of actually called myself a professional volunteer. And in 2007, my husband had been downsized for, he's president of the company that he worked for, had been let go. The new one came in, as we know in corporate. That meant my husband, who was VP of sales and marketing, was told very nicely they wanted their own guy, which happens all the time.
Mhm.
And that is where I say by accident. That's when my husband and I decided to co-found my first company, which is RSG Sales. And we help home decor and furniture suppliers grow their e-commerce sales channel. So that would be like Wayfair and Amazon and, all the places that we shop all the time now. And that led me to start my own decorative throw pillow company in 2013, like from my kitchen table, and grew it very rapidly. And within 2.5 years, we were a top 5 pillow supplier at Wayfair, and learned a lot, made many, many, many mistakes. And also realized that I didn't like owning a product-based business. So I decided to sell the company in 2019. And since that time, I have done a couple of different things. I was an interim president of a I'm getting tongue-tied, of a high-end home decor company, and I was supposed to brought in, kind of clean everything up and hire my replacement. And that is what actually led me to coaching, because I loved the consulting and saying, hey, this is how you can fix these problems. But on the consultant side, I was doing the fixing, and I decided I like to tell people how to fix things without me doing it. So that's what led me to start Extraordinary Women and my podcast, Boundaries, Business, and Boobs.
I have to
love that
ask.
title.
I have to ask what the story is behind your podcast title, Heather, because that made me laugh a lot, and I was like, there must be a story behind this.
You know what? I wish I could say there was, but I have a group of business colleagues that we meet every week religiously. And we kind of, it's like a little bit mastermind, a little bit therapy, a little bit friends, all of that combined. And I was talking about the podcast and that I was really struggling. And oddly enough, we were bouncing around some names, but oddly enough, one of the men in the group said, I think it needs to be Boundaries, Business, and Boobs. Boom. And everybody went, that's it. That tells you exactly what it's about and who it's for. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think what you're saying before, Heather, about the nice thing about being a business coach is that you don't actually have to do the stuff anymore.
Right.
That is so relatable. I was head of operations in a consulting firm before I set up as a business coach, and one of my joys when I first started as a business coach was just like, go and do that. Tell me how it goes. I shall go over here and do something else. And it's a wonderful thing actually to be able to use your experience and expertise to support other women. So yeah, thank you for giving us the whistle stop tour of your business experience and the various chapters of your serial entrepreneurship.
Yeah. I love that whistle stop tour. That's great. I'm gonna have to use that.
Now today we are talking about 7 figures at any cost. And I loved when we first had a conversation about this, Heather, you brought up these 2 concepts. The first was women always ending up in situations where we make ourselves smaller, which it's a funny thing, isn't it? That as a business grows, we can feel like it's almost like crowding us out of our own lives and that kind of thing. So I thought that was such an interesting thing. But I think there's also something that is a real kind of pitfall for ambitious business builders, which can be that feeling of like, oh wow, this is getting really big now. 7 figures is on the horizon. What do I do about the fact that I don't think I like this, and it's not filling me? It doesn't spark joy. So yeah, Megan, where should we jump in with these two topics?
I'd love to know where do you think that stems from, Heather?
Though not liking what you're doing, or the company, or can you be a little more specific?
Women making ourselves smaller.
I think that's because I think women of a certain age, and I'm 52 years old, and we were always taught to be the good girl, to be nice. Don't be ugly and say something ugly, and all of those things really do kind of diminish us as women. And I think we carry that into our entrepreneur life. And further that by we make ourselves smaller by feeling like we have to do everything for everyone. And so I think that people pleaser in most of us is another thing that actually does make us smaller, because it makes us take, anything that's important to us is the last thing that happens on the list. And this has been a lifelong thing that I'm working on, but I think it's not a new phenomenon. So I think those are some of the ways.
What do you feel is really required for us to shift that?
Yeah, great question. I think that the first thing you need to do is begin to learn to love yourself more. And one of the ways that I always say to do that, because people are like, oh yeah, I do, but you really don't. Now, like if you say to me, give me 10 things you love about yourself, do you know most people can't do that, right? And so the big thing that I start with clients on is say, I want you to write down one thing every day that you genuinely love about yourself. Not you're thankful for, not that you're grateful for,
Not outside of
not that
yourself.
you outside you. And you know what? And we can have those bad days, but it could be like, I really love my blue eyes because I love how they really pop and make people, I can really see people or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You can come up with things even on a bad day that you love about yourself. It doesn't have to be always so serious and deep. So it could be like, I love my sarcastic humor, and so when you start to do that, you do it for a week and you kind of look back and you're like, oh, wow, okay, I hadn't really thought about this. These are 7 things that I do think are really wonderful about myself, and then continue to do it. And by the end of a year, you've got 365 things. Like how many people can say, I have a list of 365 things that I really, truly love about myself and bring me worth to myself and make me feel worthy.
I love that. So from that space, once we've, kind of fallen in love with ourselves more, which is a journey that lasts a lifetime.
Yes.
How does that help us to stop playing small?
It begins to make us be able to put ourselves and our own wants and needs above others.
Totally.
And I use this analogy a lot of a line leader. When we were all little and in like kindergarten, 5, 6, first grade, whatever, do you remember being so excited to be the line leader?
Mm-hmm.
It was a big deal, and it was an honor, right? And even if you have kids and they would come home when they were little and they're like, Mom, I got to be the line leader. So it's just like, that's a really cool thing. And I equate that to, we made ourselves smaller through the years so that all of a sudden we were like 10th, and there were 9 other things or people ahead of us that were more important than us. And when you begin to validate your own self-worth and your own confidence, you begin to move yourself up that line. And you then realize that you have to be the line leader of your own life, because if you're not going to be fulfilled. And that transfers into your business as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just facilitating our 7-figure corporate leader circle today in the Dames, and the number one thing that was up was everyone feeling like like everybody else gets the priority, like their
Yeah.
team gets the priority, like their kids get the priority, like everybody else gets the priority. And fortunately, I do think that this is shifting um, for women, I would say under 40, it's shifting and they're
Yeah.
really coming up in a different way where they're starting to say, no, I know, I understand the value of self-prioritization, but the truth of the matter is we only have 2% of female-owned businesses in the States that get to seven figures. Of
Mhm.
that, a vast majority of those women who've gotten to that level are above 50.
Yes.
So they're still dealing with this problem of, it's like it's an unraveling of this old school philosophy of putting others first
Mhm.
that has to happen, which takes time. And I think a lot of women just lose patience in that when we can't lose patience in that. If we're going to shift the paradigm, we cannot lose patience in that. We have to
Right.
really understand how to unravel that belief of society, of ourselves, et cetera, so that we can bring in a new set of beliefs that
100%. I
I
agree with
have
that.
to put on my own mask before anybody else's. I have to
Yeah.
make sure that I'm healthy. Otherwise, I can't make sure my family is. I have to make sure that I make money. Otherwise, I can't make sure my team
Mhm.
does. We really have to do those things on a consistent basis. Can't just be I'll do this as my New Year's resolution for a month.
Yeah, no. And what I really believe in is two things. One, I believe in you have to schedule everything because I don't know about y'all, but if it's on my calendar, it happens. Right? I believe it. Like if I put on my calendar, that means I am taking the time and energy investment to do that. The other thing is that a lot of times, if you work from home or you have a team or something, this is a really old school and silly way, but set a timer. In other words, don't allow yourself to keep getting interrupted in things. Set a timer for yourself that you're going to dedicate that during this 25 minutes, I'm doing this and nobody can bother me during this 25 minutes, And it's just a way to put some structure and consistency behind the concept of putting yourself first.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And having those practical things is what's really important for us to be able to make moves in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly.
So, if we're thinking about let me just say it this way: why is it important to run larger businesses in your world, Heather? I know what my definition is. I know what Jessica's is, but when you think about seven figures, and especially seven figures at any cost, what does that look like to you?
So I think that at any cost is a little bit backwards,
Yep, agreed.
meaning
Yep.
it's not seven figures at any cost. It's seven figures in a way that works for me. And I've built now 3 different seven-figure plus businesses. And I have learned as I have gotten older that if I haven't created something that actually works for what my goals are and my day-to-day lifestyle, then it's never going to actually be able to sustain and maintain that profitability, right? So for me, why do you want to grow and scale? Well, for me, it's flexibility because I grow and scale and I gain flexibility in that because I delegate more. I have a good team in place. I understand my role and responsibility and where I thrive and bring value and revenue to the business. And, that's what scale is. So scale is flexibility. Scale is why do you do it? So that you have the long-term growth and revenue that you're looking for.
Yeah, so scale, like why behind the scale? The why behind the scale.
Flexibility.
Yeah. But I mean, each person coming up with their own why behind the scale.
Yes. Oh, yes,
right?
yes.
I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
I misunderstood. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I totally agree. And it's like starting just the same thing with when you're in business. You should always have the why and the vision at the forefront, because if you don't, what are you doing it for?
And it's okay that your why changes.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I'm a firm believer in my world and in the world of the dames that your why has to be internal. If you make it about your kids, if you make it about your team, if you make it about your this, if you make it about that, it will well, part of it is not to be morbid, but part of it is we can lose those external attributes.
100%.
And that sucks. That is not ever fun to think about. But if we make our source of our joy, our satisfaction, our happiness, our anything outside of ourselves, there's an inherent problem that lies in that. And I hear women a lot of times, and this kind of almost goes back to the original conversation we were having, when we put that space of, this is what brings me happiness, this is what, it's outside of me, it's my kids, it's my family, it's my spouse, it's this, there's almost something, there's a disconnect that's inherent in that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like when it's something external like that, for me, it's like sort of hedging your bets a little bit. I think you're right, Megan. There's a disconnect, because ultimately, whatever your business is, it requires so much from us to lead a business, to have a vision. And I think for me, if there isn't like a strong personal motivation, I don't think I've really ever said that my why in my business is for my kids. I love them, but like I think it's a risky thing to sort of put that on them, like, oh, you have to be really happy that I did this business. Well, actually, no, I kind of did it for my own fulfillment, because it's fun and because I wanted a way to show up in the world that felt like it reflected me as an authentic person. And I think, Heather, what you were saying about the flexibility, 100%, I just, for whatever reason, I'm not really a 9-to-5 person. And so to be able to work in the way that I do, but also to be able to help my clients to be able to fulfill their lifetime achievement and sort of get that, that lifetime potential that all of us have, but to be able to take it on a really big scale. I think that's the way I always go with that conversation. I think because if we're not able to connect it to something within ourselves, I feel like that is a way of like dodging the question, making ourselves smaller again. And it takes quite a lot of courage, I think, to say, it's actually not for my kids, it's for me, because it feels incredibly selfish. I find as a mother,
root of the problem.
Exactly.
Right. See, and I also look at it this way, that if you don't have your why be connected to you, I mean, let's face it, being an entrepreneur is not always roses, right? There are hard times. And so you have to have it tied to you, or otherwise you're going to end up resenting the business.
Absolutely. And to me, it should be a connection, not only through your business, but through all of your life.
Yes.
So for me, my why is to create connection through fun and love. And if I don't put fun and love at the forefront, and if I'm not connecting to myself, and if I'm not connecting to my own self-love and my own creation of fun within myself, I can't ever do that externally. But that aspect of my why is woven through everything that I do. It's what gets me up out of bed every single day. Yeah. And if we can't connect to something that does that, then yikes.
Exactly.
And we do end up playing smaller, I think. I wonder, Jess, where would you like to weave in?
I am sorry, for a lot of this conversation, I've just been like kind of listening and like really like in my head, like, oh yeah, I agree. But I think there's definitely something in like this. I think for some of us, business is almost like it is a quest for our own personal fulfillment. Like, who am I in the world? What am I supposed to be achieving? I guess, Heather, one of the things that I would love to hear your take on is, like, what do we do when we start to feel like our business is growing, it's exciting, it's maybe a little bit too exciting, and it's taking us down a path where we're like, oh, I'm starting to resent the space that this takes up. I'm starting to feel a bit crushed by the weight of responsibility and having like team members that I'm now financially responsible for and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, what's your take on that as a starting opener, Heather?
Well, so I like to always have very practical and tactical things. And so because I've been through this, so when I have felt like that, I would go back and do a good old fashioned time study. And when I did that or do that, and I am like one of these people who say, do it in 15-minute increments, and do it if you can for 2 weeks. then you go back and you look at it and you're like, okay, well, what here brought me joy, what was fulfilling, what was revenue generating, what drained me, what drained me and didn't, bring in revenue, did all of these things. And when you can really identify what those pieces are, that's a first step. And maybe what drains you is you hate to do a daily huddle, like 10-minute stand-up meeting. Okay, well, is there a way around that? So you then begin to figure out, how can I work ways around it? And then as far as it goes with the team, I also feel, and I've made this mistake too, but what I really work with my clients on is, you are not to be friends with your team. You are to have a good working relationship, that your business is its own living and breathing entity. And the minute, and that's like a hard thing for some people to say, but I started, but when you start to feel overwhelmed and resent your business, then you need to step away and realize your business should be able to live and breathe without you. And you should have team members that should be able to do their job, because that's the point, right? They're not there to be your bestie. They're there to get a salary or get a paycheck or what have you. So you have to look at, how are you spending your time and what's dragging you down? Can you offload those things? And if you can't right now, put in a place and a timeline to do that. And then have a good hard look at what your team is doing and each person's function. And are they actually fulfilling the role that you hired them for? And if they're not, why? And then either put in a performance plan to fix it, or decide that you need to have somebody else. Because that's it. Those are the two major reasons we start to resent our business. One, we feel like it's monopolizing on us. And two, we feel like we're getting taken advantage of because our team isn't doing what they're supposed to do. And as women, we put up with that too long. That's like, it's ridiculous. We feel like, oh, but they have their own family and they have this. Guess what? In corporate, we don't do that. Why is it any different?
Yeah, I think that's a really easy one to fall into, isn't it? Because I think, especially if you pick up team members along the journey when like things are a lot less formal, like it's very easy to make the mistake of like just being best buddies. But what do you think, for people listening, Heather, if they are like, oh yeah, I think I've done that, what do you think is like the recovery plan? Can it be salvaged at that point, or is it just like you got to rethink the whole thing?
So I think what you have to do is relook at your company culture and your company values. And have you veered from that? And if you have, then you need to, I believe in just being head on and addressing it with everyone and saying, hey team, I started this company based on these values and this culture. We've gotten away from that. And so I'd like to talk about how we can bring it back to these things. So that's one way. The second way is, if you have developed that bestie relationship with someone on your team, there's usually a lack of respect on one side. And it's really hard to come back from that. So, in that situation, I usually, recommend to people that they look for somebody else, because the other thing is that person's probably not going to take you to that next step that you need them to. And that's another mistake that I think a lot of female entrepreneurs make. We think that the person that I hired first, in my first year and a half of business, probably is not going to still be the same person and people that you need when you've been in business for 10, 15 years. You're going to need a whole different type of person and skill set with most. It's the rare person that's been there, the entire time.
Yeah, I think it can be quite like emotional, can't it, for women? Not necessarily for all women, but I think definitely like in conversations that I have and what I've observed in myself, like sometimes we find it hard to be ruthless in business, which like has its upsides, but it can be quite a difficult decision. And I think if you feel like you're reprimanding or like getting rid of a friend who's working for you, that definitely is a really painful thing to go through. But I think it's one of those things when you spot that the relationship has ceased to be productive, it's kind of there's nothing really to be gained from, like, I think sometimes we're just like, I just hope that it's going to be fixed, and then we just kind of we persevere and we try things, but actually sometimes it's just it's a branch that has to be pruned.
Well, and if you've fallen into that trap, you've fallen into the trap that you forgot your business is its own living and breathing entity. Because you have to, as the entrepreneur, always make the best decision for your business. Doesn't mean it's the easy one, but you have to always make the best one. And that's because, and if you fall into that trap, you have to be able to step back and go, okay, this is what's best for my business and for my businesses to succeed and thrive.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think we could almost combine last month's call with this one, because while I agree in some instances, I also believe that it has a lot to do with the different people who are on the team and the different leaders. Because if you look at Wealth Dynamics, for instance, or if you look at Colby, or if you look at Enneagram, or if you look at Human Design, if you look at any of those, our styles are going to be very different. And I want and desire and deeply crave a personal relationship with my team. And if I don't have that, I won't work with them for very long on certain levels. At certain other levels, when it's an admin team or there's some other, but I don't mix having to make decisions with personal relationship, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
The plan of the business itself, there are business decisions that have to be made. But if I don't have a personal relationship with or connection, I have no desire to work with those people.
But see, you've created, so you've created some internal boundaries for yourself, because you're like, no, I can make these separate decisions. They're not the relationship. So you've created that personal line for yourself, and you understand when to separate out, right? When to separate out. I have to make the decision as the leader versus, just trying to make people happy.
Yeah. And I've set that up from the beginning as an expectation. Yeah. That this is the way that our team works. And so we're going to have a lot of deep conversations and deep connection. And when there's business to be done, that's this is the structure, this is the guidelines, this is the way that we adhere to it. And it's also, it has a lot to do with, as we grow as entrepreneurs, understanding who we need to hire, where we need to fill gaps. So many women business owners aren't even thinking about that, because they're like, well, it's me and one other person, or it's me and two other people. But the higher up you get, the more budget you're balancing, the more people you have on payroll. You have to really look at it from an emotional standpoint as a woman, as well as putting structure and boundaries and balance in place.
Yeah, and you mentioned a good thing, because I'm actually also a certified Colby consultant. And so one of the things is really understanding how you work as an individual, and then, what is a counterbalance to that, and making sure you have that yin and yang in your team, and making sure then that they're in the right roles, that they're in the right positions.
Yeah. Depending on what you're using, it's like Jessica uses Wealth Dynamics, making sure that all 4 quadrants are balanced out on your team.
Yeah, because I think that when we are often hiring early on in a business, we tend to hire people who are just like us, and they've got the same skill set. We really like them. There's a lot of rapport. But I think as the business grows and the strain on the business owner grows, we start to need to make complementary hires where we're consciously bringing in people who are strong in the areas that we're not. And I think that's when it's really good to have that self-understanding. So, and this is exactly what we talked about last month, isn't it? But having that self-understanding so that we can genuinely see our kind of less strong areas without having ego attached to it. Just be like, yeah, I don't like to do that, and I'm not very good at it. Let's find someone who can help us with that. But I think something else that we can develop later rather than sooner is almost an appreciation of what each team member's ROI is, because I think it's very easy to be like, I am the business owner, I am the principal consultant, well, everything comes from me, I am the fee earner. Where actually, if we're using our team members strategically, actually every person should be contributing to the revenue and the profit, not just the person who's the face of the brand.
100%.
100%. I agree with that.
It's tricky though, isn't it? Because I think that can be a real shift at times. And you're like, oh, how do we do that if it's not all me? But it's starting to change your mindset into a leadership mindset, I think, ultimately. I don't know if you would both agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would. And I think actually it starts. So Megan, what I really liked about what you said a few minutes ago was you have a very clearly defined expectations and culture, and you lay those expectations out from the get-go. And I think that's where some of us can get tripped up. And I think that prevents us from being the leaders we can. We think that, I think I've said that. It's like all in your here instead of, out where everybody can understand. And that's where you can get into some trouble when you are hiring your team. I think also the sign of an amazing leader is to know what they're not strong in.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you look at like an athletic team, and they have, everybody has different positions and roles. And that's the whole purpose that, I'm thinking of basketball in particular, but I can, but in basketball, you've got your, your guards and you've got your big men, and you don't want your guard over there, trying to dunk the ball. Your guard is the one who's supposed to be able to feed the ball on the inside and make the easy layup. Right. And so everybody has such an important and pivotal role that as you grow, yes, you started playing one-on-one pickup in your driveway, but as you got, a little bit older and more advanced, you started being on teams and better teams until you make it to the pro, and everybody's role is so clearly defined that if one person doesn't do their, isn't contributing in the right way, then the whole team has a little bit of an adjustment period. Just like when someone isn't, is a rock star, you want to feed that. Let's keep feeding that, because that's what makes the whole team better.
Absolutely. Let's dive a little bit more into the topic of culture, because I think that this is something that's kind of glossed over a lot of times. And people say, well, we hire based on culture. And we do this, we do that. And it's like, okay, what does that exactly mean to you? Because so I want to talk about some of those elements that really do mean you are running a culture-based company. And even women who are running high six-figure companies, low six-figure companies, they're trying to get into seven figures. Even if you think that you have a company culture that's defined, let's for a moment realize that if we think that we know all the answers, we're not keeping ourselves open to actual possibilities. So let's just erase what we think, and let's have a conversation as three badass CEOs of how can you at any point, any stage in business, integrate a positive and well articulated company culture? What would you say to get us started on that, Heather?
I think it starts with yourself, really defining and aligning with yourself what that looks like, because it has to be in alignment with your own personal values. I mean, it has to align personally and professionally. That's it. And once you have begun to discern what are those things that are required for your business and the way that you want to be perceived in the world professionally, the way you want your clients to see you, the way you want your team to see, and the way you want to be treated, it goes all in all of those aspects. So I think it really starts with yourself and understanding what you do and do not want.
Absolutely. And what I used to do with clients when I was working with them in the world of marketing and branding is, once you figured out as the CEO what your core values are, your core mission and your core vision, we would do an activity with the core leadership team where we'd help them define 5 values for the core leadership team, which then became the values of the business, as long as they are people who've been there for longer than 2 years and are you're planning on keeping them.
Yeah.
To develop what the definitions are of the business, of the values of the business. And then also defining what does it look like when any of our team members are out of alignment with those values, and what does it look like when they're in alignment. And I mean that from an external standpoint, so that we can see what does it look like in our office? What does it look like in our team meetings? What does it look like to our clients? How does it look to the outside when we are actually living in our value of love or fun? And really defining those things, and then making sure that you're checking up on those values on a consistent basis with your team. Are there any other things that you would recommend, Jessica or Heather, for the team to do to really make sure that you're creating and living an intentional company culture?
I think you need to make sure they're empowered, if, to be like, hey, I think we're steering from this. You need to be able to empower your leadership team, or anyone, quite frankly, to be able to come in and sit down with you and say, hey, Jessica, hey, Megan, I've noticed that we have stopped, we've been straying from this XYZ during this meeting, or we aren't doing this part when we're working with our clients. And, that was really important because blah, 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 blah. So giving people the space and the ability to advocate for that same shared goal.
Yeah. And I think similar to what you said originally, Heather, I think for me, it starts with boundaries, because how we allow people to treat us, and how we allow people to treat the business, how we allow people to treat our team, that's been a really important thing for me. But what I love actually is when one of my team members says, this goes against our values. And sometimes I can be really blind to it. And I'm quite I love possibility. I love to make things work where we can make them work. And sometimes they're just like, they just do this face. And I'm like, yes. And they're like, Jessica, I think this is out of alignment with our values. And it's like, oh, you're right. Okay,
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah.
But I think almost that sense of accountability, because there's a real difference between team members who just like, how are you? Fine. How's your week been? Fine. Good. Like they're there, but they're not there. Whereas when people can give you feedback in the moment and weigh in on things, not necessarily to make decisions for you, but to be that kind of red flag indicator system for you. I think that's a really, to me, that's one of those moments where I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you guys are here.
Well, and I think on the flip side of that, it's just as important for you as the leader to be able to say, I screwed this up, guys. I screwed. Yeah. Taking accountability. Like, hey, I was really gung ho for us to have this client. It was not it's not a good fit. I'm sorry that I've gotten us off this track, and because that happens too.
Totally.
So I think having that, accountability, and be able to say, oops, I did it again, like Britney Spears says.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that, just kind of thinking of this from a tangible standpoint, we have standards that we've developed in the Dames that's for our internal team. And we go over those standards as part of their onboarding. And then we talk about those standards and how we're all adhering to them as we're going along, but checking in on a consistent basis on our monthly planning calls, where we say, okay, what worked this last month? What didn't work this last month? What do we want to carry forward with us into the next month? And what do we want to let go from, into the future? And really that creates that space of that culture as well, as long as you have created a space of trust, so that everyone can actually talk about from their own standpoint, what hasn't worked for me, because what has worked for you may not work for me. And if we could change that ever so slightly, we could still adhere to the standards, but making sure that we're honoring everyone who's involved.
Yes, that is spot on, as they say. Yes. And I think, you said that really, really well.
Thank you. Is there anything else that we want to address as it relates to, the titles that we like to create are a little bit tongue in cheek so that it gets people like, thinking about it. So
Yeah.
when we talk about that 7 figures at any cost, is there anything else that you've seen or that any of us have seen that will not work in the way of growing to a sustainable 7-figure business, 8-figure business, and beyond as more and more women move in that direction? Is there anything else we need to ditch, let go of?
You can't do it all yourself. You can't do it all by yourself. So it's not humanly possible.
Yeah. So what is that? I mean, again, what does that look like in application when we need to be aware of that in ourselves, and other women need to be aware of that themselves?
Well, so how many times have maybe we have assigned a new initiative or a project or something to somebody else, and it was something that we were really excited about, and maybe it's evolving a little bit different than we had originally anticipated, which is great. And it probably is going to be a bigger and better thing, but you can't just go in and jump all over that person and take control back of that project. You have to be able to regularly communicate your expectations on the front end and have that regular dialogue. So I guess what I'm trying to say is you've got to don't be that control freak. You cannot be the little, control freak. You have to be able to let people do what you have hired them to do and that you've empowered them to do. So I think that's a biggie. I also think that in practicality, I have known person after person who has taken a financial hit themselves in order to pay their team or support something with their team. And that's not what a leader does. That's not what an entrepreneur does. That's not a real business. So, and doing that when women and men too, possibly, do this, but I really see it in women. They kind of take a martyr syndrome, and that's not productive. That's not good.
It almost becomes a badge of honor. Like, I didn't pay myself this month. And it's like, oh no, no. No.
Yeah, that's a red flag for a business that is not actually going in a good direction. That's not a path you want to slide down, is it?
No.
That does not valor make at all.
No. And I think some people do that. They're like, oh, I'm making 7 figures, but you're not paying yourself. That's not.
It happens.
That's not a 7-figure business.
Freaking often. And it's just like, these are the things that we've got to really take care of in the very beginning. We cannot wait for something to happen before we really put ourselves first. And I think that's the moral of this whole entire story is take the time to pause and really evaluate in every single area of your business. Where are you forgetting about yourself as a woman business owner? Where are you ignoring yourself? Where have you just gone with the flow of whoever the heck you think you should be going with the flow with? And where can you put yourself back in first so that you are having your needs met?
Yeah.
I think another thing too is we need to make sure we understand our numbers and what our true actual profitability levels are. Like, understand your true cost, understand that if a client pays you $30,000, fantastic. That doesn't mean you've necessarily profited $30,000. You need to understand and really set, very clear, profit margins and stick to them. I mean, that may mean that you cannot make that new hire. That may mean you can't, spend that little extra on advertising or buy that, new software or whatever. You just have to wait it out a little bit longer. And I think too often we, business owners will sacrifice that profit margin thinking, oh, but it's going to help me the next time. No.
Exactly. And we'll make decisions based on, but I want to be able to pay this person more. I want to be able to give this person an opportunity. I want to be able to,
Yeah. And understand, like, if you want to do that, great. What's the actual cost that it makes that happen?
Exactly. Because there's almost always a situation where you have to give up something in order to make that happen, and making sure that that's part of your standards as well.
Yes.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
love that. Jess, is there anything you'd add to this?
Yeah, I think sometimes there's a huge pressure on us as leaders to, I think we probably generate it internally as much as we feel it from other people, but it's like be more impressive, be bigger, like take on more sort of, I don't know. I often find the biggest challenge is to be self-accepting and to play to my strengths instead of feeling like I've got to take on a ton of strengths that I don't actually have. I think that it's much easier when you can quiet that negative internal voice that's always criticizing everything. I think for myself, for a lot of the women that I work with, that is the main thing that we work on, because actually when you can make decisions for the good of the business, being clear-headed about your own vision and values, that's so different from when you're making them from a place of ego and trying to prove yourself and trying to generate that sort of external validation. And we said this at the beginning, I think it always has to be an internal agreement that you have with yourself.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jess,
I
it's a
agree.
perfect time for you to share. How can women work with you? How can people work with you? Well, who are your favorite clients to work with? And then we'll ask Heather the same. What are you working on these days, and how can we support you, or how can people get in touch with you? But
Yeah.
Jess, why don't you start first?
Yeah, so my company is called Seven Figure Consultant. I love to work with women consultants and thought leaders who are at 6 figures and 7 figures and in between those two numbers and sometimes beyond. But I love to help women really work out, like, what is the space in the world that you are meant to occupy. Often when women come and work with me, they're like, I feel like I'm sort of down here, and my inside, like, knowing tells me that I'm supposed to be up here and there's a big space in the world that I'm supposed to occupy. So we get clarity on what that is. We bring the strategy to the table that's needed to bring that about, and we work a lot on the mindset and the motivation to keep that front and center. I think as women, but all people, we have this inbuilt fear of our own amazingness and our own potential, and I think that quite often it's a battle with ourselves. We are fighting every day to stay true to that internal vision. So I'm all about helping women create their 7-figure consultancy, or make the 7-figure consultancy they already have even better. So yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn, or come and find me at jessicafernley.com.
Beautiful. What about you, Heather?
Yeah, so I work with women in my company called Extraordinary Women, and I work with women who have built that successful 6 and 7 figure business, but are feeling overwhelmed by it and their personal life, and really are needing to figure out how to create those boundaries and guardrails to be able to free them up and really create the business and life that they thought they were doing in the first place. um, and so we do a lot of, like Jessica, we do a lot of mindset work. We also focused a lot on, the systems and the practical side of how you implement that, and what does it really mean to you, and what does it look like? Because what it looks like for Heather is not what it looks like for Jessica or Megan. And so understanding that you need to build that unique business in life just for yourself, for your own fulfillment. So, and you can find me either at my podcast at Boundaries, Business, and Boobs, or at extraordinarywomen.com.
I love it. And if you are a woman who is especially running a company that generates more than 250,000 in revenue annually, or you're a director or higher in a large organization, and you crave having deep conversations like these amongst your peers and women who really get you, because they are also highly educated, high caliber women in business, then I would invite you to check out thedames.co/roundtable. We are an extraordinary international community of women running 6, 7, and 8-figure companies who come together to mastermind, to really learn about what it takes to continue to grow their businesses without losing out on lives. And so, Heather, what's one point that you would leave our audience with today as we close up? What's one thing you just want to make sure that they remember?
Become your own line leader.
Awesome. What about you, Jess?
Yeah, I think Heather's nailed it, to be honest. I'm thinking, is there a different way that I would phrase it? But I think that was a really helpful reminder for all of us. Like, you can't be someone else. You got to be yourself. And actually, the resonance that we can create when we are being true to ourselves, when there is no kind of, oh, I'm not sure about this, or, trying to self-sabotage, or just not being sure if we're on the right path. Like, the answer to all of that is always inward. So just being able to be your own line leader. I love it. Thank you, Heather.
Yes.
No.
And I would just say that making sure that your why and what gets you up out of bed every day is within you as well. So that all ties together so beautifully, ladies.
So aligned.
Love it. Well, this has been a wonderful show, and thank you all for listening. We'll be back next month with another episode of the 6 to 7 Figure Women podcast.
Thank you.